Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the presentation of the Quarter 3 2020 Labour Force Survey, or LFS, results. My name is Jim Dowell, and I am a statistician in the Labour Market Analysis area, and my responsibilities for the LFS. Can I advise you first that the methodology and the information note published alongside the Q2 LFS results on the 24th of August last still applies. The link to this information note is shown on the screen now, and a link to the information note is also provided in the LFS release for Quarter 3 2020 in the CSO website. COVID-19 continues to have a very significant impact on data collection for the LFS. The suspension of all face-to-face household interviewing was commenced last March and is still in force, and therefore, like Q2, all LFS interviews for Q3 were carried out by telephone. Since last March, our interviewers no longer call to homes but conduct LFS interviews over the phone. Households selected for it to be included in the LFS sample receive introductory letters by post, asking them to ring to schedule an interview. The LFS and other household surveys give us a picture of the economic and social situation of the citizens of Ireland in a way and with a level of accuracy that no one else can gain. So if you're asked to take part in the CSO survey, please do so. It means that when the CSO figures are quoted, you know they're accurate because you told us. The LFS is published using the International Labour Organization, or the ILO, definitions of employment, unemployment and inactivity. These are the international standard, and under EU regulation, the CSO is obliged to compile labour market estimates from the LFS according to these concepts and definitions. The LFS results published today for Quarter 3 have been compiled in this standard way. The CSO began publishing COVID-19 adjusted estimates of unemployment as part of the monthly unemployment estimates released for March of 2020. The latest COVID-19 adjusted unemployment estimates from March 2020 to October 2020 inclusive were published on the 4th of November last. The estimates for the end of September 2020 and the end of October of 2020 are included in the LFS release today. These measures should be considered as the upper bound for unemployment. The CSO has also been making available COVID-19 adjusted employment estimates as part of the LFS releases for Quarter 1 and Quarter 2 of this year. COVID-19 adjusted employment volumes and rates have been made available today in the LFS release for the end of September and October of 2020. These should be considered as the lower bound for employment. Separate to the LFS, we are also publishing today the third of the Labour Market Insight series of bulletin-style releases. These outputs are designed to provide high-level supplementary analysis to users alongside the current outputs and metrics. The data presented is sourced from the LFS and administrative datasets, and the bulletin being published today is specifically designed to give some additional context to the LFS results for Quarter 3. Before I present the results for Quarter 3, let me first remind you of all the ILO definitions used in the LFS. Firstly, a person is classified as employed if during the reference week he or she works for 1 hour or more for payment of profit, including work on the family farm or business. And secondly, if a person was away from work during the reference week but had a job to return to. A person is classified as unemployed if during the reference week he or she was not working, had taken active steps to seek employment in the previous 4 weeks, and is available to start work in the 2 weeks after the reference week. Finally, a person is classified as inactive if he or she does not fulfill the conditions for being either employed or unemployed. Specific rules govern the ILO status of persons who are temporarily laid off from their work, depending on the degree of attachment to the job. This impacts the labour market status as follows. A person is classified as still being employed if the expected period of absence is within 3 months, or if the person continues to be paid at least half their wage or salary where the period of absence extends beyond 3 months. A person is classified as unemployed if the expected period of absence is more than 3 months or unknown, and if the person continues to receive less than half its wage or salary from its employer, and if the person has taken active steps in the 4 weeks prior to the survey to find work and is available for work within the 2 weeks after the survey. If the person fails to meet the conditions for being unemployed, he or she will be classified as inactive. So now moving on now to the headline numbers. And using the standard ILO criteria, the unadjusted number of persons aged 15 and over in employment stood at 2,295,200 in Quarter 3, with an associated employment rate of 67.7% for those aged 15 to 64 years. At the end of September of this year, the COVID-19 adjusted measure of employment, or the lower bound of the number of persons aged 15 and over in employment, is estimated to have been 2,078,058, with an associated COVID-19 adjusted employment rate of 61% for those aged 15 to 64 years. Using the standard ILO criteria again, the unadjusted number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who were unemployed in Q3 of this year stood at 174,700, with an associated unemployment rate of 7.1% for those aged 15 to 74 years. At the end of September of this year, the COVID-19 adjusted measure of unemployment, or the upper bound of the number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who are unemployed, was 394,538, with an associated COVID-19 adjusted unemployment rate of 15.9% for those aged 15 to 74 years. Finally, the ILO defined labour force was 2,469,800, with an associated participation rate of 62%. Those not in the labour force totalled 1,514,300. The LFS results presented today may not show fully the impact that would have been expected from COVID-19. This may be partially due to the application of the ILO criteria to persons who were away from work during the reference week but had a job to return to, or those who had lost their job. Many of those persons were either still classified as employed or failed to meet the criteria for being classified as employed or unemployed, and therefore would have been defaulted to being classified as being active. In Q3, all persons who were away from work during the reference week but had a job to return to expected to return to work within 3 months or were paid at least half their wages salary. Therefore, those persons are still considered to have an attachment to the job or were classified as being in employment. The pie chart on slide 18 behind me profiles those persons who were classified as out of work in Q3 but had not worked since the end of March of this year, when the full effects of the public health restrictions started to take effect. You can note that 18.2% were classified as unemployed, while the remainder were classified as inactive, due mainly to being available for work but not seeking work or did not want a job. The CSO were able to link LFS data for Q3 with revenue data in respect of recipients of the Temporary Wage Subsidy Scheme, or the TWSS, up to the end of August when the scheme ended, and the Department of Social Protection data for those in receipt of the Pandemic Unemployment Payment, or the PUP. This linking of data was done in accordance with CSO data matching protocols. When the ILO criteria was applied to this match data, 58.8% of those in receipt of the PUP at the time of their interview were classified as employed. 15.3% were classified as unemployed, while 25.8% were classified as inactive. A high proportion of TWSS recipients at 95.7% were classified as employed, while less than 1% were unemployed and 3.8% were classified as inactive. This and some further information on TWSS and PUP recipients is available in the Insights Bulletin that I highlighted earlier, that's published today. Returning now to employment, and slide 21 compares the annual change in employment with the annual change in the number of persons away from work and the annual change in the average total hours worked per week. Just under 2.3 million persons aged 15 and over were in employment in Q3, and of that, 298,900 were away from work during the reference week. Virtually all of the annual reduction in employment in Q3 were for persons in the 15 to 34 year age group. While employment fell by 1.4% over the year, there was an increase of 35.6% in the number of persons employed but away from work over the same period. The reasons for absence would include, for example, temporary layoff due to slack work, family-related leave and holidays. As explained earlier, those persons were classified as employed under the ILO criteria in Q3. The extent of these absences from work during the reference week resulted in a reduction of 5.4% or 4 million over the year in the number of total actual hours worked per week, which stood at 70.5 million hours in Q3 of 2020. The table on slide 22 presents absences from work during the reference week for each economic sector as a percentage share of total employment for each sector for quarters 2 and 3 2019 and quarters 2 and 3 2020. As you can see, the effect of public health restrictions as a result of COVID-19 in Q2 of this year are very apparent for a number of sectors. Some notable examples would include accommodation and food services activities, where 68.5% of those employed in the sector were away from work during the reference week in Q2 of 2020, compared to just 6.7% a year earlier. In construction, 45.3% were away from work in Q2 of this year, compared to 5.3% in Q2 2019. And in transportation and storage, 28.8% were away from work in Q2 of this year, compared to just 4.3% a year earlier. The bar chart on slide 23 compares the percentage share of employment in each sector accounted for by absences from work during the reference week for Q3 2019 and Q3 2020. While generally absences from work in the reference week are higher in Q3 for any year due to summer leave, the different impacts of the easing of restrictions and the resultant return to work are very apparent for some sectors in Q3 of this year. For example, the share of absences in the construction sector was 8.5% in Q3 of this year, compared to 6% in Q3 of 2019. And in the wholesale and retail sector, the share in Q3 of this year was 8% compared to 6.4% a year earlier. In some other sectors, however, like transportation and storage and accommodation and food services activities sectors, the share of absences remained quite high in Q3 this year compared to a year earlier. Again, the Labour Market Insights series bulletin published today contains further information on these aspects. The bar chart on slide 24 shows the number of hours worked expressed in millions by economic sector for Q3 2019 and Q3 2020. While the number of hours worked in a number of sectors were near Q3 2019 levels in Q3 2020, the number of hours worked in other sectors such as accommodation and food services, administration and support services, other NACE activities, sectors and construction indicated that COVID-19 restrictions were continuing to have an impact. Again, the bulletin that's published today contains further information on hours worked. Turning now to the economic sectors, and employment fell in 7 of the 14 economic sectors over the year. The greater rates of decrease were in the accommodation and food services sector, which was down by 16.1% or 28,600. The administration and support services sector, which includes activities such as rental and leasing activities, employment recruitment and travel agencies, was down by 13.4% or 14,600. The other NACE activities sector, which includes arts, sports, entertainment and cultural activities, was down by 10.7% or 12,800. And finally, the construction sector was down by 8.8% or 13,300 over the year. The greater rates of increase, on the other hand, were in the financial, insurance and real estate activities sector. That was up by 8.2% or 9,400. And the professional, scientific and technical activities sector was up by 7% or 9,300. Turning now to employment by gender, and male employment fell by 13,700 or 1.1% over the year, while female employment was down by 18,000 or 1.7%. Full-time employment remained virtually unchanged over the year at just close to 1,854,000, while part-time employment fell by 31,900 or 6.7% over the year to 441,600. Virtually all of the reduction in part-time employment was for females in Q3, and the pie chart on slide 28 shows the percentage breakdown of this change by economic sector. As you would expect, the main sectors were accommodation and food, wholesale and retail, the other NACE activities sector, which includes arts, sports, entertainment and cultural activities. Part-time underemployment was 117,700 in Q3 of this year, and that accounted for 26.7% of total part-time employment in this quarter. The number of self-employed persons and the number of employees both fell over the year. Self-employment fell by 2% and employees fell by 1.4%. When adjusted for seasonal factors, employment stood at 2,289,000 in Q3 of 2020, and this represented an increase of 3% or 66,300 over the quarter. Turning now to unemployment, and as I mentioned earlier, using the standard ILO definition, the unemployment rate was 7.1% in Q3 of 2020. The numbers unemployed in Q3 stood at 174,700, and this represented a 36.4% increase over last year. In volume terms, there were 89,100 males and 85,600 females classified as unemployed in Q3 of this year. Male unemployment was up by 23% over the year, while female unemployment was up by 53.8%. And nearly half of female unemployed persons in Q3 of this year were in the 15 to 34 age bracket. You can note that the previous sectors of employment for nearly half of females classified as unemployed in Q3 were in the accommodation and food services sector, the wholesale and retail and other NACE activities sectors, and that, as I mentioned earlier, includes arts, sports and entertainment and cultural activities. The long-term unemployment rate, that is persons unemployed for 12 months or longer, remained unchanged at 1.4% in Q3 compared to a year earlier. There were 34,600 persons classified as long-term unemployed in Q3 of this year, and this accounted for 19.8% of all unemployed. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate increased from 4.9 to 6.7% over the quarter. In volume terms, the seasonally adjusted number of persons unemployed was up by 45.1%, or 51,000 over the quarter to 164,300 in Q3 of this year. Finally, turning to the labour force, the total number of persons in the labour force in Q3 of this year was up slightly over the year to nearly 2,470,000. In terms of decomposing the change in the labour force, there was a positive demographic effect of 27,900 and a negative participation effect of 13,000. On a seasonally adjusted basis, the labour force increased by 117,600 or 5% over the quarter to 2,462,600 in Q3 of this year. That completes the data element of this presentation this morning, and the next slide presents details of forthcoming releases from the Labour Market and Earnings Division of the CSO. Firstly, the Industrial Disputes release for Q3 of 2020 will be published on the 24th of November next. The day after we'll have the Earnings and Labour Costs or ELC results for Q3 2020, and that will be published alongside the fourth series of the Labour Market Insight series. The monthly unemployment estimates for November 2020 will be published on the 2nd of December, while the live register release will be published 2 days later on the 4th of December. The Q4 2020 LFS results are scheduled to be published on the 23rd of February next year. And finally, the topic and release dates for any further Labour Market Insight series bulletins will be confirmed in due course. And as always, users should check the CSO release calendar for upcoming releases. In previous briefings, we have mentioned about the new integration of European Social Statistics or IESS regulation, which is coming into force from Q1 next year. This covers various social statistics teams, including the labour market. And we'd like to remind users that in terms of the LFS, the new regulation will include changes to the LFS questionnaire with the addition of some new variables, the removal of some existing variables and changes to others. But also there's a change in the availability of other variables, which will be available only on an annual or biennial basis rather than the current quarterly basis. The changes to be made under IESS will result in a possible break in series for the LFS in countries across Europe in 2021. However, for Ireland, the changes required are much less substantial than some other member states who have significant sampling and methodological changes to apply. The regulation mandates for the elimination of breaks for 14 series back to 2009, and these series are included in slide 41 of your presentation. The CSO will be required to provide these break-free series to Eurostat by the 31st of December next year. So what actions have been taken by Ireland? The CSO plan on backcasting the 14 series to Q1 1998 and a parallel survey of the existing LFS questionnaire and a new ISSS compliant LFS questionnaire is currently underway, and this will inform this process. The CSO are planning to conduct the backcasting series prior to the publication of the Q1 2021 results, and users should note that this is likely to result in a delay in the publication of these results. Where possible, the backcasting exercise will include additional series that are not mandated for under ISSS. However, we would caution that we may not have the same scope for doing so as was the case with the change from the QNHS to the LFS in 2017. The labour market team and the CSO will of course engage further with users in advance of the implementation of this regulation and the publication of the first set of IESS compliant results for the LFS for Q1 next year. So in summary for today, the results for Q3 2020, like previous quarters, have been compiled according to ILO definitions and concepts. The effect of COVID-19 are apparent from the results. Over the year, employment was down by 31,700, while unemployment was up by 46,600. The effect of easing of public health restrictions in the third quarter was also evident. Over the quarter, employment grew by 66,300, while unemployment was up by 51,000. The number of hours worked in the reference week have recovered from the low of 59.2 million observed in quarter 2 of this year. Today's results show total hours worked per week to be 70.5 million hours in quarter 3 of this year, which is down 5.4% from a year earlier. Absences from work during the reference week were nearly 300,000 compared to just over 550,000 in quarter 2 of this year. This concludes the presentation this morning, and thank you very much for your attention.